Hi, I'm Morag from our Permaculture Life, and we're at the Australian Permaculture Convergence in Canberra, and it's my absolute pleasure to be here with David Holmgren, the co-originator of Permaculture. And he's been here presenting many different talks, but one of them is about the launch of his new book, Retrosuburbia. And so rather than, I was going to do you a review of this book shortly, but rather than me doing it, I would hear it from the author himself about what this book is all about and why you've written it.
Yeah, well, it's about retrofitting what we've already got. You know, most people live in a place that's already there, a house that's not necessarily, the perfect energy efficient house. There's already a garden, often multi-generational stuff being done.
Yep.
And we come with all of our baggage of relationships and behaviours and everything. And how do we retrofit all of those? The built environment, the biological of the garden, and all the human behavioural stuff to be ready for surviving and thriving in uncertain futures.
Yeah. So I think it takes permaculture, I guess, in people's thinking out of going out and designing your bush box somewhere and right back into our heart and our home and where most of the people in Australia live. And so if we are actually going to make a significant change for the future, it has to be where people are at and where people are thinking, and it's right in the cities and the towns and the suburbs. So I think it's a really timely book. And I was kind of keen to find out from you what the response has been so far from people, and what examples too, a second question, what examples are there out there that you see as sort of something to point to say, yeah, look, have a look at this, and this gives you kind of an idea of what I'm trying to talk about.
Yeah. Well, I think there's been quietly people doing this stuff, obviously, for a long while in the suburbs of not just our capital cities, but regional towns and even small villages where people live in basically the same template as what most people think of as suburbia.
Yeah.
And doing that through a lens of permaculture, but maybe not, just doing stuff at home, being more home-based, more self-reliant, and I think a lot of those people have said, this is exactly what we're doing. And there's a whole lot of case studies that we've picked up in the process. We haven't done the sort of exhaustive research. There's thousands of people out there doing it. Yeah. And we've homed in on our home territory that we're familiar with in Southern Australia. There's 4 case studies in the book. There's another 12 on the website. But we're hoping this book will stimulate a whole lot more people to say, oh yeah, I'm doing that, and that there's people wanting to communicate that with their neighbours through things like Sustainability Street groups, transition groups, council supported household sustainability programs. But of course it's also people who are not particularly interested in green stuff. They're just looking at for a better way to live now, downsizing, getting out of debt, not being on the work treadmill all the time. It's just common sense,
really, isn't it? Yeah. So, I heard you saying yesterday about trying to stimulate people to create their own little local household groups, neighbourhood groups, just in your street with your neighbours, to actually take the ideas from this forward, and that's one of the major ways you see it rippling out. If someone is sitting here watching this and they're in their suburban house and they go, yes, that's what I'd like to do, how would you like to sort of suggest or encourage them to take it forward, to make that next step, to connect?
Well, I think there's a whole lot of things that people can do, wherever they are. I mean, the talking to the neighbours, not about big ideas, but just some commonality of sharing something over the fence or making a connection. It's always about those connections. But there's, of course, a whole lot of ideas in the book of how we look at where we are realistically and what are the opportunities and what are the disadvantages. Because people often fall into one of 2 responses to where they are. Either, my place is no good, can't do anything here, can't grow anything in the backyard because there's too many shady trees, or the other end of, this has always been a good and comfortable place to live. It'll be fine no matter what happens in the future. I don't need to worry or change or do anything different. And yet the truth is usually somewhere in a blend
Yeah.
between those two extremes. So the connection across the fence in the community is really important. But sometimes also people who are very community minded are always talking out there about, what we can do and encouraging others, and they're forgetting what's happening at home and getting one's own house and household in order. So it's that balance of doing by example and connecting with other people who are doing that for inspiration. And of course, now with social media, that network connection is so easy, but the geographic connection is still sometimes a little
It is,
hard.
isn't it? Yeah, and people feel isolated in their little... And actually the fences have got bigger and the security's got larger, and we do often find ourselves in little cages in our communities.
And sometimes the analysis that can come from reading a book like this and the Retrosuburbia real estate checklist, which is actually a downloadable spreadsheet on the website, it's all explained in the book, can lead us to go, maybe this is actually not the right place to be, and we need to move closer to ageing parents, where our adult kids are, or downsize and get out of debt. And so this book can also stimulate that sort of realistic evaluation of, maybe we need to move, but not spin out of orbit and go to some remote rural property. Let's build on the skills and social connections we have.
Yeah. And it makes a lot of sense, I think, because, I think we've been choosing our houses for a long time in Australian society for the wrong reasons. It's been choosing it for its future resale or for its look or for something, rather than for actually its meaning as our home and as our place of connection with the land, with our family and with our neighbours. And so this is actually helping us to ask the right questions to then seek the right answers, I suppose.
Yeah, and a lot of those, it's as a pattern language of, here's the little templates that have found to be useful by other people in all of those three fields. And we're not saying all those answers are there, and it's certainly not giving detailed recipe, but it's giving people, the attached solar greenhouse facing into the backyard is a pattern that repeats in a lot of places as something that can work. There's patterns of gardening, of allocation. What balance of trees and perennials are we going to have compared with veggie garden and animals, and recognising that there's a lot of different solutions, and those keep building, but there's also some patterns in that people can replicate.
You have quite a big vision with this. I've heard you talking about, Melbourne being a place of change. You're talking all of Melbourne, aren't you, when you say that?
At the moment we sort of say this book is targeted to the 10-20% of households and people who are already making some changes in this direction or want the putting their toe in the water. We're not seeing at the moment, this will be the majority thing, because this is quite radical too in some ways, and in some ways it's just recreating the common sense that our grandparents had in suburbia even in the 1950s and 60s.
Well, I grew up in the suburbs of Melbourne in the 1970s, and we had no fences, we had our fruit trees in the backyard, the kids played out in the street, we shared stuff, there was all of these things there, and that was the 70s. It's not that long, my parents are still there, but now I go back, the fences are up, the kids are not so much out in the street. I actually went with my kids out on the street, and we started writing with chalk on the road, these big signs, slow down, and we reoccupied the streets because there was no kids on the streets, and even simple things like that, and waving to your neighbours, little points of activation can actually start to open up great big conversations again.
I think the cells of that are happening in the suburbs again, and no more dramatically than the place that's on the cover of the book, which is
beautiful
called
picture,
Hibby Farm, after Hibiscus Court in suburban 1950s suburban Heidelberg West. And it's an amazing not just household but also network of people around there who've taken down the backyard fences, and so there's a lot of this stuff is happening. Maybe again there's another resurgence, but a lot of that's captured in one of the chapters of the book is the short story of my Aussie Street presentation, which tracks an imaginary suburb from the 1950s through the various eras and what happens, and through into the future, which is a challenging future of the Second Great Depression in the 2020s, but it shows how the people in Aussie Street survive and thrive.
So I was going to ask you that question. If we don't start taking this approach in our cities, what is the alternative?
Well, the alternative that the big development industry has got is we're all going to be in high-rise apartments, or roll out more sterile big McMansions on the fringes covering over our best peri-urban land, or the Retrosuburbia is the alternative, because in fact we've got 8 million beds in Australian houses that are, there's no one there.
That's ridiculous.
Most of our houses are not actually used for much of the day because people are on the treadmill working to pay for them, and the possibility of reoccupying the suburbs and actually having more people live in the same space. And what about crowding? Get half the crap out, put the cars out on the street, get rid of them, get the kids occupying the street again, so they're not running around inside the house, crowding the house. So the way kids used to play on the street, and reoccupying the backyards with food production.
And it's a
so all of that is possible, that ironically we could support more people in the suburbs without building any more buildings.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also too what you talk about, sort of revaluing the household economy. Again, we always think about the economy as being a thing that's out there. We go out there to earn, but actually how we can actually simplify our lives, create a much richer and healthier and happier lifestyle by reclaiming and revaluing that household economy again. Yeah,
well, throughout history there's always been a mix of a household economy of self-reliance and a little bit of a monetary economy. Of course, as affluence has grown, that monetary economy got a bigger part, but what's happened in recent generations is the last juices in the household economy have been squeezed dry, and everyone's been pushed out or sucked out into the monetary economy.
Children included,
Children, and then the recreation at the gymnasium, eating at the restaurant because you've got no time to do anything at home, and yet sitting at home you've got this kitchen and facilities that are just you're paying for, but you're not even using. That's a crazy misallocation of resources.
So this is just absolute common sense in practice, really, is what I kind of see it in it. And I hope that it's this book. Well, already it's taken off. You're saying already it's 2,000 copies have gone out. Many more. You've got interviews in New York, and it's going to be translated into many languages. Even though you're saying it's something that's relevant to Melbourne, you wrote it sort of Victoria-centric. Up where I live, up in, just outside of Brisbane, I still see it has massive relevance too there. And, as many more examples that we can gather to feed in through things like the Retrosuburbia site, and I just see, I see this as a new movement, I reckon.
Yeah, well, maybe it's the permaculture movement 2.0.
Yeah, I think so. And
I don't want to sort of, cast it as that necessarily, but a lot of people are saying, yes, this is the
it's a growth and a development of the movement into where it is naturally moving to. And I think you're kind of articulating, gathering, what's the word, curated a collection of really fantastic examples, but given new inspiration too for everyone to kind of take it a step further and to connect with other people. Because quite often I've seen permaculture adopted as something that's personal. You do in your own household, but it really only comes into its fore, I think, when we start to connect with other people in our communities, in our neighbourhoods, and whether we know them already or whether we forge those relationships. And it's that interconnectedness between ourselves, and it's a placemaking through a permaculture lens, I think, is where things just start to flourish.
And that's why suburbia is that sweet point between the economies of connection that are possible in urban space, but the degree of autonomy and self-reliance that we associate with rural living,
that's right.
that at its best, suburbia can provide both of those worlds.
And there's enough space. You know, the amount of food that you can grow in a small space of land when you do it really wisely is extraordinary. And being able to actually cut out all the transportation and all the bits in between, the waste bits. You're right, the suburbs are the sweet spot. I like that. I think that's really, it makes a lot of sense. So if people want to get hold of this book, where should they, how do they find it?
They can go online and the website retrosuburbia.com, there's direct to the online bookshop, which is part of our own distribution system, bypassing the Amazons of this world. You can't get this on Amazon. And also it's getting out in independent bookshops and so it's getting out there through a number of ways, and there's a whole lot of resources on the Retrosuburbia website.
And so you self-published this, didn't you?
Yeah, well,
and it's
we've always
printed in Australia too.
Yes, it's printed
very nice.
in Melbourne with a family-owned business that's still part of the printing industry, which is mostly, of course, gone offshore in China.
And you've had a really interesting process too of incorporating a whole lot of permaculture people in the editing and design and evolution and
it's a
and
total
the illustrations, beautiful illustrations. Like, if you've ever seen a permaculture book so beautiful, I don't know, this would have to be it, I reckon. Yeah.
Well, there's some very creative, capable people who've put a lot of heart and soul into this, and it's certainly been a big team effort.
Yeah.
We are rolling that out also with my Aussie Street presentation, which is really the most powerful presentation I've ever done, because it connects with ordinary people's lives. It's a story. It's a made-up story, but it's true to the actual history, possibilities, and new emergent examples. And some of these examples that are in the book have actually been partly inspired by my Aussie Street story.
Yeah, right, nice. And I think that's one of the threads that I've seen coming through really strongly through this convergence that we're at now, is that idea of creating a new story. Yeah. That until we actually have in our minds a different image of what it is that we're working towards, we don't really know which direction we're going. And so I think this is a really important step along the way of helping people to imagine the future that we want, imagine a positive future where we are connected. And so thank you, David, really, thank you.
Thank you, Morag, for your continuing contribution in helping to create that world too.
Well, absolute pleasure. Yeah, thank you.